Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Behind the Servants. Today we will be covering a trifecta of freakishly fearless French paladins of Charlemagne, that is, Astolfo, Bradamante, and Mandricardo. The legend of Charlemagne is essentially the French equivalent to the Knights of King Arthur's court. Thus far, we have two of these paladins and Mandricardo, who is a figure in the story of Charlemagne. And yes, I'm aware that Charlemagne is featured in other content, and yes, I know that Ronaldo has appeared in FGO during an Astolfo interlude. But, as neither of them are currently summonable, I will not be covering them now. Honestly, each of these figures are fairly minor characters in the Legend of Charlemagne, with Bradamante being the most well-known pre-Fates Astolfo. So, the information on them is somewhat loose. Though these figures are equated to being similar to the Arthurian legends, there's a key difference. The Arthurian legends are ones that have been expanded on and added to over the course of over 1,000 years. The legends of Charlemagne are about as old, but have not been expanded on nearly as much. It was almost something like a rite of passage for romance authors to write tales of Sir Lancelot and Guinevere's love for each other through various prose, in a way that we don't see Bradamante and Ruggiero. But that's enough the English teacher in me. Without further ado, let's look at the paladins currently at Chaldea. Let's do this in the order of which they were released, starting with Astolfo, then Bradamante, and concluding on Mandricardo. I will have timestamps available for you if you want to skip ahead to any particular paladin. Astolfo has been ruined by fate. By that, I mean he's unresearchable outside of his own legend. The name Astolfo now pretty much belongs to the Fate rendition, where he's an adorable trap, but let's look at his legend anyway. Astolfo first appears in The Matter of France, in a transcription written in the 14th century. He's almost always portrayed as a humorous character, being lighthearted and somewhat dim-witted, but never truly as an idiot. In a word, he's a goofball. His first introduction comes from his meeting Ruggiero, who is the lover of Bradamante. Ruggiero is in search of the witch Alcina, and ties his magical steed, the Hippogriff, to a myrtle tree. The tree speaks up, telling Ruggiero to get the rope off of him. The tree is Astolfo, because of course it is. Astolfo had also been in pursuit of the witch Alcina, but had been cursed by her, transforming him into a tree. The pair talked for some time, primarily Astolfo trying to convince Ruggiero to let the witch be, lest he meet a similar fate. However, Ruggiero would disregard these warnings and pursued the witch, winding up in the same situation as Astolfo. The pair would be saved, however, by a sorceress named Melissa, as well as Bradamante. You did hear that right, by the way. The Hippogriff is not Astolfo's mount, but Ruggiero's and also Bradamante's. Astolfo's mount was a horse named Bravicano. It was said to be born from hurricanes and flames. It fed upon the air and walked so gently that it would not leave marks even on the smoothest of sands, but was quick enough that it could outrun an arrow. The reason it is associated with Astolfo, however, is because he did borrow it from Ruggiero for a time, but we will get into that later. Other magical items that Astolfo had were his golden lance, which we see as his primary weapon in game. It was said that even the most gentle of touches from this lance could dismount an opponent from their steed. He also had a magical horn that could cause his enemies to turn around and run in fear, which I believe is the inspiration for his stun skill. He has yet another magical item which we see him use in Fate Apocrypha, which is his magical book that can break enchantments. This one, however, is not featured in-game. Astolfo has some legends dedicated to him, so let's take a look at those. One is about his encounter with Orillo. Orillo was an immortal bandit with the ability to regenerate any injury that he took and reattach severed limbs. At a loss at what to do, Astolfo cuts off Orillo's head and scalps him. This was the requirement to prevent Orillo's regeneration from working, and the bandit dies. Another story that made me laugh involves Astolfo and Giocondo, a friend of his. The pair find out that their wives are having an affair against them. Rather than punish their wives, they decide to do a science experiment. They want to determine if women are as susceptible to cheating as men are, and so the pair have sex with 1,000 women each. They then find out that the girl that they are currently seeing is cheating on each of the men with the other. They decide that men and women tend to cheat on each other equally and allow their wives to continue their affair. Let me put this into context. Astolfo got cucked, and rather than commit acts of domestic abuse, he cheated on his wife with 1,000 women, decided that men and women both cheat, and said, "Alright, that's fine. Do what you want, dear." France is wild. Anyway, the final anecdote on Astolfo I want to talk about ties directly to his fate portrayal. Astolfo has a skill that is called Evaporation of Reason. This skill is supposedly why Astolfo is so flippant about everything. Now, he got this skill from the time that he spent on the moon. Let me explain. Astolfo traveled to Ethiopia to meet its king, a blind man named Sinapo. Sinapo is being tormented by harpies who are preventing the man from eating and drinking. If this situation sounds familiar, it is because it is almost word for word a retelling of the Greek myth of Phineas. Astolfo chases the harpies off with his horn right through the gates of hell, where he seals the door. At this moment in time, he had stolen/borrowed Ruggiero's hippogriff and lent his horse and lance to Bradamante. This stealing-borrowing actually ends up saving Bradamante from her wizard uncle. Long story short, Astolfo has the Hippogriff. He uses the mystical steed to fly to the Garden of Eden, where he meets John the Apostle, who explains to him that all things that are lost on Earth can be found on the moon. As such, Astolfo assumes that another paladin by the name of Orlando's senses must be on the moon then. So, Astolfo borrows the chariot of Elijah, which can be seen as being adjacent to the chariot of Helios, and rides it to the moon. After searching around for some time, he finds his friend's senses on the moon in a bottle. Upon his return to Earth, Astolfo recruits Sinapo to assist the French army. But that's the bulk of Astolfo. He's a minor character in the legends that serves primarily as comic relief, and I'm glad to see that he's expanded upon in the Fate universe. As a side note for you Japanese mythology fans out there, Astolfo's appearance in his saber form, that being as a rabbit, is because of his association with the moon, and the legend of the rabbits on the moon. This is a complete tangent from the legend of Charlemagne, but as it pertains to a version of Astolfo, I figured it's worth bringing up. The legend has many variations, but we will look at the Japanese one. This version is taken directly from the lovely boxu.com. I'll have a link to it in the description. One night, the man on the moon came down to Earth disguised as a beggar. He chanced upon a fox, a monkey, and a rabbit, and asked for some food. The fox brought him fish from a stream, and the monkey brought fruits from the trees, but the rabbit could only offer grass. So he told the beggar to build a fire, and when it was built, he threw himself upon the flames to offer himself to the man. Amazed by the rabbit's generosity, the beggar transformed back into the man on the moon and pulled the rabbit out of the fire. To honor the rabbit's kindness, the man on the moon carried the rabbit back to the moon to live with him. Now, if you look at the full moon, you can see the outline of a rabbit pounding mochi on the moon. I'm unsure if Astolfo's saber has any voice lines that indicate this connection, or if this is just a speculation on my part, but he's cute, so it's fine. Bradamante is probably the most famous of these three characters. Historically a female, she has an entire opera dedicated to her and her lover Ruggiero. In fact, the bulk of their legends are the two having relationship problems in the most mystical ways possible. For starters, Bradamante was a French Christian and Ruggiero was a Saracen Islamic. The two met by chance and fell in love with each other. However, Bradamante refused to marry Ruggiero unless he converted to Christianity. Through a series of events, Ruggiero became trapped by a sorcerer by the name of Adelante. He traps Ruggiero as he has seen that the knight is considering a conversion, so that he may marry Bradamante, and that should he convert, he will assist Charlemagne and die from a brutal betrayal. Thus, Adelante traps him in a world of illusion where he is constantly chasing after his lost love. That is, until Bradamante herself appears and saves her lover. Ruggiero does convert to Christianity, and yet Bradamante's parents still do not see him as a viable suitor. Bradamante decides to make a competition of it all, declaring that should any man defeat her in battle, then she will marry them. She defeats the suitors that had appeared for her hand, but loses to Ruggiero, solidifying their marriage. Supposedly, their line of children still exists to this day as the House of Este. So, if you have Italian heritage, then you may be related to one of the heroes in Fate directly, and a super cute one at that. As for Bradamante's operatic debut, it is in the opera Alcina by George Frederick Handel. Bradamante spends the vast majority of the opera chasing after Ruggiero, who always seems to be whisked away once the pair get back together. For example, the opera begins right after Bradamante has rescued Ruggiero from Adelante. Bradamante's hippogriff takes a liking to Ruggiero and snatches him away, flying off to an island where two sorceresses reside, one by the name of Alcina and the other Morgana. Classic. It is here that we pick up where we were first introduced to Astolfo. We will get into the more detailed version of that whole encounter now, as it does concern Bradamante. Employing the help of a good sorceress named Meliso, Bradamante and her new companion travel to the island. When they arrive, they find that Ruggiero is under the spell of Alcina, and can only think of her. Morgana throws away her current lover, Oronte, in favor of Meliso. The pair are welcomed to the court by the sorceresses and also Astolfo's son, Oberto, who is looking for his father. Bradamante deduces what likely happened to the fruity paladin, but keeps it to herself. Instead, turning towards Ruggiero and chastising him for abandoning his knightly duties. She does this to give her a good reason as to their visit. Morgana's infatuation with Meliso grows, now believing her to be a him named Ricciardo. Her former lover, Oronte, attempts to duel Meliso for Morgana's favor, but she quickly stops the fight. In a rage, Oronte tells the brainwashed Ruggiero about Alcina's habit with lovers, that being that she eventually throws them away and turns them into objects, much like Astolfo. Ruggiero angrily confronts Alcina about this, but she essentially re-seduces him right in front of Bradamante. Throw into this that Meliso attempts to stir the pot by pretending to have fallen for Alcina as well. Losing her rationality, she shouts out her true identity to Ruggiero, but Meliso counters this, causing Ruggiero to become incredibly confused. To reassure Ruggiero that she loves only him, Alcina says that she will turn Ricciardo, i.e. Meliso, into an animal. Morgana warns Melissa about this, begging him to leave, but she says that she will stay as she loves another. Morgana believes this to be her. Next, Melissa gives Rogerio a magic ring, which breaks the enchantment that Alcina has over him. Realizing everything that has happened, he panics and can no longer differentiate illusion from reality. Hence, when he next meets Bradamante, he refuses to believe it to actually be her. Now both Alcina and Bradamante get depressed at Rogerio's new indifference, and as a result, Alcina goes off to turn Ricciardo into an animal to prove her love. This forces Rogerio to pretend to still be under her spell, and convince her that she does not need to prove her love. It becomes clear to the audience at this time it's different for Alcina. She appears to have genuinely fallen in love with Rogerio, and as a result, her magic power begins to wane. This is explained as her powers relying on illusion, but with the introduction of these newfound emotions, her power dissipates. This comes to a head with Bradamante and Rogerio finding the source of her power, usually displayed as a cursed urn, and smashing it. Thus, all of her spells break, and all of those that she had turned into objects return to being people, Astolfo included. Thus, the paladins ride off. That is the very, very condensed story of Bradamante. Our final matter of France character of the night is Mandricardo, who will be introduced in the Atlantis Lost Belt. Mandricardo was a Saracen king who possessed the sword Durandal. This name may sound familiar to some, as in FGO it is the name of Hector's noble phantasm. The sword, Durandal, once belonged to Hector, and also to Penthesilea, and would be passed down for generations until it ended up in the hands of Mandricardo's father, Agricane, who would be killed by Orlando, who would then take possession of the sword and armor at the time. But the implication of this, and from what is spoken about in Bradamante's voice lines, Hector is a progenitor to Rogerio and Mandricardo. I have to say, the Chaldean family meetups are some of my favorite features in the game, like when Ushi meets Raiko or Gareth meets any of her brothers. It really warms my heart. Anyway, Mandricardo wants to get Durandal back and avenge his father. This puts Mandricardo in a villain's role in the story, but we'll revisit that later. Mandricardo marches towards Orlando's location, and on the way falls in love with a woman named Doralis, who he more or less steals from her fiancé via her eloping with him. I don't get this French fascination with cucking people because there's a lot of it in the matter of France. Are y'all okay over there? If you're French and watching this, please let me know that you're okay. Mandricardo confronts Orlando, only to find that he has gone completely berserk. He is nigh invincible, so rather than fight and likely die, he takes Durandal, Orlando's armor that once belonged to Hector as well, and Orlando's horse, all of which that Orlando discarded in his lack of sanity. This is where both his first and third skills come from. He did all of this after defeating a man named Zerbino, who is also in search of Orlando. Zerbino dies from his injuries later on. It is important to note that Mandricardo had planned on killing him sooner, but was asked not to by his new wife. Eventually, the guy who Mandricardo is cucking, Bradamante, catches up with the pair. He challenges Mandricardo to a duel for Doralis' hand in marriage. Mandricardo accepts, believing that he can easily dispatch the cuck. As the two are fighting, both are summoned to fight off a Christian force that is attacking a Saracen camp. The pair agrees to continue their duel at another time after they are pressured by Doralis. Honestly, she does not get enough credit in the matter of France because Mandricardo is portrayed as something like a barbarian, and he constantly is trying to keep Doralis happy, which is incredibly adorable. After the threat has been dealt with, the men ask Doralis to make her choice. She naturally chooses Mandricardo, so the cuck goes off into the woods, dejected. However, he returns and challenges Mandricardo once again. Others latch on to this challenge of a duel until a group is formed and various people try to decide who will fight whom first. So they go to the Saracen king of Africa, Argamante, and he decides the duels will take place at his palace and that the fighters will be decided through drawing lots. You know how this sounds really confusing and all over the place? Well, that's because it is in the legend as well, so bear with me. Mandricardo is set to go against Rogerio. This is before Rogerio meets Bradamante. The two duel, and while Mandricardo is the favorite to win, Rogerio manages to strike a fatal blow that kills his opponent. I believe that this final clash is where Mandricardo's second skill comes from, seeing as this skill does kill him, but is incredibly powerful. Thus, Mandricardo's portion of the story ends. He is a minor character in the story, though an interesting one. As I am yet to play the Atlantis portion of FGO, seeing as I play exclusively on the English server, I don't know how well he stacks up to his legend. From his voice lines, however, he appears to be more like a gloomy dude than anything else. However, there is something neat that is worth mentioning about his FGO appearance. He wields a wooden sword, rather than Durandal. This is because he has a noble phantasm based on a part of his legend. That he would never sheath a sword that he drew until he retrieved Durandal. In return, any weapon that he used would have the same power as the legendary weapon. hence why the wooden sword is so effective. If you also play on Yen and are not spoiled for the story, then I predict that this will be something that is resolved, or at the very least it's addressed. Regardless, this Hachiman lookalike will be welcomed to my Chaldea with open arms. But that's it! 2 of the 12 paladins of Charlemagne and 1 gloomy lad in the books. Thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know in the comments. Also, leave a comment if there's any servant in particular that you want me to cover so that I can add it to my doc. Like the video as it really does help out the channel. Share with your friends and teachers, subscribe to catch these when they go up. Thank you all once again, and until next time, keep your chins up. Peace.